For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Massacre in Gaza today. According to the health ministry, more than 100 Palestinians are dead after Israeli forces fired on a group of Palestinians waiting in line for humanitarian aid. This survivor spoke to Al Jazeera.
As soon as the aid trucks entered, the Israelis started shelling and shooting everyone who was on the road. They opened fire randomly, killing innocent men and women in cold blood. There was gunfire, snipers shooting, tanks shelling, and drones.
Gaza's health ministry says around 700 people were wounded in the attack. The death toll in Gaza has now surpassed 30,000. Victims of the blast were sent to nearby hospitals that are struggling to provide basic care after being attacked and denied fuel and supplies by Israel's military. Dr. Dadella Aisafia spoke to Al Jazeera outside Al-Shifa in northern Gaza.
The majority of the victims suffered gunshot wounds and shrapnel in the head and upper parts of their bodies. They were hit by direct artillery shelling, drone missiles, and gunfire. All our operation rooms are full, and all medical staff have been deployed. Above all, we ran out of medical supplies and fuel necessary to operate the hospital. We hope we will be able to provide any life-saving procedures to those victims. All victims are in critical condition. They're lying on the floor. We stand helpless amid the sharp shortage of supplies and staff.
Separately, Gaza's health ministry is reporting 6 children died in the north from starvation, malnutrition, and dehydration. The group Save the Children says there's a mass killing of children in slow motion in Gaza. The UN has warned of famine and reports people are eating weeds to survive in the north. The U.S. Supreme Court says it will consider Donald Trump's immunity claims in the federal prosecution that charges him with trying to subvert the will of voters and overturn his 2020 presidential election loss. Trump has claimed presidential immunity in that case. Lower courts have rejected it. Catherine Carley reports.
The court scheduled arguments in late April and at the former president's request has put his March trial date on hold. Loyola law professor Jessica Levinson tells NBC she expects the high court will uphold an appellate court's rejection of immunity, but it's new legal territory.
This is the type of case that the Supreme Court does look at. It's a big constitutional question. It's a matter of first impression because we've never been here before.
Illinois has now become the third state to kick the former president off the ballot for leading an insurrection. Meanwhile, a New York appellate judge has refused to stop collection of the $500 million civil penalty while Trump appeals that ruling. I'm Catherine Carley for Pacifica Network and Public News Service.
President Joe Biden and Donald Trump will hold separate campaign events at the U.S.-Mexico border in Texas today. Biden wants to hammer Republicans for tanking a bipartisan border security deal on Trump's orders. Progressives also opposed it, calling for comprehensive immigration reform efforts, including pathways to citizenship for some undocumented already in the U.S. Biden will rally at the Rio Grande Valley city of Brownsville, where border crossings are down. Trump will be 300 miles away at Eagle Pass, which is the epicenter of a standoff between Texas and the federal government over enforcement. An undocumented woman and 2 children drowned there trying to cross the Rio Grande. Congressional leaders reached a tentative deal to avoid a government shutdown slated to begin Friday night at midnight. 6 bills would keep the Veterans Affairs and Departments of Agriculture, Transportation, Interior, and others operating at current levels. Another 6 remaining bills for the Pentagon, Homeland Security, Health and Human Services still need to be finalized. Voting in the House is expected today. Catherine Carley reports.
Congressional leaders have reached a potential deal on 6 of 12 annual budget bills, pending approval by the House and Senate, along with another temporary spending stopgap. That would avoid a Friday government shutdown, keeping it open into next month. But Pentagon spokesperson Major General Pat Ryder says budgeting this way hurts national security.
The fact is that this uncertainty undermines our military readiness and jeopardizes critical modernization efforts.
Meanwhile, the leaders of 24 European parliaments are urging Speaker Johnson to pass additional aid for Ukraine. I'm Catherine Carley for Pacifica Network and Public News Service.
Texas executed a man who long claimed innocence for a double homicide. 50-year-old Ivan Cantu's last words said the state was killing an innocent man. He was put to death for the 2000 shooting deaths of his cousin and his girlfriend, James Mosqueda and Amy Kitchen. Prosecutors say Mosqueda dealt illegal drugs. Cantu killed them during an attempt to steal the drugs. Cantu had long claimed a rival drug dealer killed the two. His defense argued prosecution relied on false statements. Cantu's claims of innocence garnered international attention and support. The Biden administration defended a Trump-era ban on gun bump stocks like the one used in the deadly 2017 Las Vegas mass shooting. The Supreme Court heard arguments in the case Wednesday. Christopher Martinez reports.
The Supreme Court heard arguments over whether a federal ban on machine guns applies to so-called bump stocks that modify a semi-automatic rifle to fire at a rate of hundreds of rounds per minute. The Trump-era ban is being challenged by a Texas gun shop owner named Michael Cargill. Former Texas Solicitor General Jonathan Mitchell argued the case on behalf of the gun owner, saying a bump stock is not a machine gun.
It has a very high rate of fire, but it's not automatic.
Bump stocks use the gun's own recoil to bump the gun against the trigger so that it keeps firing. Principal Deputy Solicitor General Brian Fletcher argued the case for the administration. He says a skilled competition shooter without a bump stock can fire at a rate of, at most, 180 bullets a minute. A military M16 can fire around 700 a minute, and a bump stock, 400 to 800 rounds a minute.
As long as the shooter maintains that steady forward pressure, the rifle will fire continuously until it runs out of bullets.
The regulation comes under the 1934 National Firearms Act, a law passed in response to Prohibition-era gangster violence. Justice Samuel Alito questioned lawyer Mitchell.
Can you imagine a legislator thinking we should ban machine guns, but we should not ban bump stocks? Is there any reason why a legislator might reach that judgment?
I think there is. Bump stocks can help people who have disabilities, who have problems with finger dexterity, people who have arthritis in their fingers. There could be a valid reason.
The High Court is expected to issue its ruling in the case Garland v. Cargill by early summer. Reporting for Pacifica Radio News KPFA, I'm Christopher Martinez.
I'm Christina Onestad reporting for Pacifica Radio.